This is Lewis Ritson and you're watching the Sport Icons.
So when I made the previous two videos on the greatest ever football players and of course the greatest England ever football players as well, and quite a few things to talk about those ones as well. There's no point giving me a list of 10 strikers who you think should be in the team. I need one goalkeeper, 4 defenders, 4 midfielders, 2 strikers, and of course 5 substitutes, okay? There's only certain people I can put on there, and while there's loads and loads of great players, I can't put everybody on the pitch, can I? It's impossible. Now, when I was making those videos, I knew fine well that there'd be people commenting saying, it's supposed to be a boxing channel, not a football channel. I hate football. I'm only here for boxing. If you keep talking about football, I'll unsubscribe. Well, the thing is, first of all, nobody's forcing you to click these particular videos, but unfortunately, boxing is dead. And for those of you who are making these comments and want to be a little bit snidey about the fact that I'm making some football videos to pass the time while there's no boxing going on, have you been watching the podcast, which take me a hell of a lot of time? If you haven't, jog on with your opinion. Very simple, isn't it? Now, that little bit over with. Hope everybody's well. Now, Newcastle United is my team. This is where I was born. This is where I live. Of course, I spent a lot of time down south, which is why I lost my accent. But Newcastle United, I know a hell of a lot about the history. I've been reading it for loads and loads of time, especially as a kid and a teenager, from like 1990-ish up to about 96, 97, something like that. So Newcastle United, I know a hell of a lot of history, and I do have other ones as well for Arsenal, Liverpool, Man United, Tottenham, and so forth and that as well. Just to pass the time. As I said before, yes, it is a boxing channel, and when boxing news starts coming out, of course I'll make videos on it. But in the meantime, this one, Newcastle United, this one will do absolutely pish on views, but at least I've got it for my own record. Now, Newcastle, I know a hell of a lot about the history of Newcastle, and while I haven't thought about it in quite a few years, because unfortunately I've got a pretty crap team at the minute. All right, so I haven't really been following it too much lately. In fact, I couldn't name you the first 11 in Newcastle United, but it's what it is. Hopefully once this takeover goes, I'll get my passion back a little bit for Newcastle. But historically, I was quite surprised how much I still remembered. So here is my 11. 1 goalkeeper, 4 defenders, 4 midfielders, 2 strikers, and 5 substitutes. So Jimmy Lawrence I put in goal. Reason being, well, I don't know whether or not he was actually the best goalkeeper Newcastle's ever had. I don't know. But he's a Scottish international, and to my knowledge as well, I have no notes in front of me, he holds the record of most amount of games played for Newcastle United. Of course, this was back in the early 20s, and he won the league with Newcastle. Yeah, surprise, surprise. Newcastle have actually won some silverware. Nothing since 1969, nothing major, and certainly not in my lifetime anyway. So hopefully going forward, they will at some point. That'd be nice. But Jimmy Lawrence, in my opinion, should be in the team based on the fact that he's played more games than anybody else in the history of Newcastle United. Now, as Newcastle fans, we're all pretty sympathetic, and we tend to choose our heart more than anything else. So automatically, some Newcastle fans go, where's Gary Speed? Where's Chet Tiote? Where's Pavel Srnicek? Of course, all these guys have died over the last few years. So again, people will put them in there due to sentimental value, but were any of those as good as other players who's ever played for Newcastle? My answer is no, unfortunately, which is why I've got these ones. So Frank Clark at right back. Yes, he wasn't always a right back. He could play at left back and centre back in that as well. For those of you who are about my age, who will remember the 90s and the early 2000s and what have you, Frank Clark was manager of Nottingham Forest, but he spent a lot of his career at Newcastle United. He was an absolutely fantastic defender. Nearly every year for my birthday, my mum would always give me like booklets and annuals and things like that of Newcastle, and Frank Clark was a pretty big part of all that. Bobby Stokoe, a player that my mum really, really loved. Not as a player, obviously, like he was way before her time as well as a player, but she loved him because he won the 1974, I think it was, FA Cup with Sunderland, okay, where he was manager. But as a player, Newcastle United, that's where he spent most of his career. I believe he's from Northumberland originally. Sunderland, they have a statue of Bobby Stokoe outside their stadium. I don't think there's any kind of statue or anything here in Newcastle. I mean, there might have been, but I don't remember seeing it. But sorry, Mackems, he's a Geordie. All right. Anyway, Bobby Stokoe, for me, was a great defender. Of course, won the FA Cup and that with Newcastle as well as a player. Joe Harvey also won the FA Cup with Newcastle United and was a very good manager for Newcastle as well. In fact, he was the manager when Newcastle won the Intercity Fairs Cup in 1969, the last major trophy that Newcastle won. Yes, way before my time. But that was the equivalent to the European Cup Winners' Cup, for those who remember that, before that got disbanded. So for me, due to everything that he's achieved, and he was a very, very good player, played loads and loads of games for Newcastle United, he deserves to be in the team. That's where he is. Of course, he was a defender as well as. Now, when you think of left-backs for Newcastle, unfortunately, we've never been blessed with great left-backs. We've had some okay left-backs, but never been blessed. In fact, Newcastle's defence has always been pretty poor in my lifetime. But Hudspeth, he's a guy, when I look back at the left-backs, he's probably, in my opinion, the one that stands out. Again, FA Cup winner. And I can't really think of anybody else who even comes close to him as a left-back. So that's why he's there. And I believe he only ever played for Newcastle as well, even though he wasn't from Newcastle. Or, not that I remember anyway. The two midfielders. Peter Beardsley, not really a midfielder per se. He's more of a attacking midfielder stroke striker. But I had to put him in there because he had 2 stints at Newcastle United. Of course, I don't remember anything about the first one, but the second one, of course, I remember when Kevin Keegan, that was manager. But of course, I've watched loads and loads of footage on Peter Beardsley. Outstanding player. Of course, he's from the area as well. And I know he's been going through some bit of trouble as well on the backroom staff of Newcastle United as well. I'm not entirely clued up on the situation, but that's kind of what I'm hearing. But as a player, he was exceptional. You probably you'd be really struggling to find a player who would work harder than Peter Beardsley on that football pitch. Not just for Newcastle, but for England as well. Of course, he was part of the 1986 England team and 1990 as well. He's a Liverpool legend, Everton, and a couple of others. But for me, Newcastle United for Peter Beardsley. Paul Gascoigne as well. He started his career here. He's done his apprenticeships at Newcastle. He's from Gateshead. In fact, he was actually Kevin Keegan's boot boy as well while he was learning his apprenticeship. Spent his first few years at Newcastle as a pro before getting his big money move to Tottenham Hotspur, where he really made his name. But while he was still at Newcastle, he did get a couple of England call-ups as well. But I put him in the team because, in my opinion, he's the greatest ever player to have come out of not just the North East, but England. That's my honest opinion. And who else said that? Jackie Milburn said that about him as well. So if Jackie Milburn says it, I've got to say it, right? So for me, Paul Gascoigne is a fantastic, fantastic player. While he didn't really achieve anything at Newcastle, but he did make a pretty good dent, and he is in the hearts of Newcastle United, so that's why I've got him in the team. Left winger. Newcastle has been blessed with very, very good left wingers. I could probably name you about 20 just off the top of my head. But for me, I think that David Ginola is just a little bit ahead of the rest. His flair, his flamboyance, his goal scoring. He's a little bit greedy at times. I'm not going to say that he isn't. And for those of you who are Tottenham fans, you may well have him in your all-time greatest team as well, because he was an exceptional player. Never really kind of got the credit on the international level due to his conflicts with Gerard Houllier at the time and as well. But for Newcastle, while he's only here for about 2 or 3 years, in my opinion, he made a massive, massive impact. And I can't think of a better left winger than David Ginola. That's why he's in there. On the right-hand side, that's going to cause a little bit of conflict for some Newcastle historians. Yes, Jackie Milburn was a number 9 striker. But I can't not put him in the team. And I can't not choose the other two that I've got up front in Hughie Gallagher and Alan Shearer. And I'll tell you why in a second. But with Jackie Milburn, he did start his career as a right winger and finished his career as a right winger. And he is Newcastle United's second all-time goal scorer as well. Won, I think it was 3 FA Cups with Newcastle United as well. And had for the longest time, up until a few years ago, he held the record for the fastest goal scored in an FA Cup final as well. Jackie Milburn, a legend up here, he's from the area. And of course, he's related, I think they're cousins actually, for Jackie and Bobby Charlton. All right. So Jackie Milburn, legend up here. So I've got to put him in the team. When Kevin Keegan, many, many years ago, when he'd done his all-time 11 for Newcastle United, he put Jackie Milburn on the right wing. So I'm doing the same thing. All right. Up front, Alan Shearer, don't need to talk too much about him. Everyone knows about Alan Shearer, all-time record goal scorer for Newcastle United. Of course, fantastic player for Blackburn as well, previously Southampton, and of course England. But Newcastle United, this is where he's from. Over 200 goals is phenomenal. I did feel at the time that the club put too much emphasis on Alan Shearer, like he was bigger than the club. I will say that much, but legend for Newcastle. Absolute legend. Anybody here in Newcastle who's a Newcastle United fan will say Alan Shearer. He's the man, okay? Hughie Gallagher. Now, if you're not really a Newcastle United historian, but maybe you are with Chelsea, you would have known that name. He was a fantastic player for Chelsea as well. But for Newcastle, while he was only here for, I think it was 5 years. I think he was here from 1925 to about 29 or 30, I think it was. He did win the league with Newcastle United, but his goals per game ratio was phenomenal. He played about 160 something games, scored over 130 goals for Newcastle. He's a short little guy. He loved Newcastle. Even after he left Newcastle to go to Chelsea, a few years later he moved back and hung around Newcastle, and of course Gateshead and that as well, and he died up here as well, unfortunately, when he committed suicide by walking in front of an oncoming train on purpose. So Hughie Gallagher, again, even when he played for Scotland, he didn't play a lot of games for Scotland. I think it was only about 20, but he scored like over 30 goals, if I remember rightly as well. So Hughie Gallagher, in my opinion, is arguably the greatest goal scorer that Newcastle has ever had. For real. Now, the substitutes. Now, again, I put William McFall in there as a goalkeeping substitute because of all the goalkeepers that Newcastle's had, and we've been blessed with a lot of good goalkeepers. Pavel Srnicek, Shaka Hislop, Tim Krul, Shay Given, the list goes on. But William McFall, when you watch anything from Newcastle in like the 70s, for example, he's the one. He's a rock, made some outstanding saves. Unfortunately, he wasn't in the greatest of teams at the time, much like many of our great goalkeepers from Newcastle. Maybe they all stand out because our defence has always been pretty pish. Okay, but William McFall, for me, deserves to be in the team at least. Bobby Moncur, Scottish international, won the 1969 Fairs Cup with Newcastle United. As I said before, that's the last piece of quality silverware that Newcastle won. But Bobby Moncur, I believe he's still involved with the club in some kind of level. I don't know whether he's a director or something like that. I know he was when Sir John Hall and that was there, and Freddie Shepherd. I don't know about now. But Bobby Moncur, he was captain of Newcastle United for quite some time. Was with Newcastle for like the longest time as well. Excellent defender. So Bobby Moncur deserves to be in the team, in my opinion. Chris Waddle. Again, Chris Waddle, a lot of people will remember him for England, of course, missing the penalty in that as well. But excellent player for England overall. He was with Newcastle United as well when he first started his career. But a lot of people may remember him at Sheffield Wednesday. You may remember him at, was it Marseille, I think it was, or Bordeaux or something. Either way, he went over to play in France. But Chris Waddle, again, I didn't know until he was pretty much retiring that he's actually a Sunderland fan. A little disappointing. But anyway, Chris Waddle, he was in the team with the first version of Peter Beardsley. Of course, a couple of years that Kevin Keegan was there. Terry McDermott, and that was there as well, who was nearly in the team, Terry McDermott as well. But Chris Waddle, exceptional player, really was. Again, Chris Waddle, he even played a season or two up front in the number 9. Not a lot of Newcastle United fans know that, but he did. Kevin Keegan. Now, Kevin Keegan, he was only with Newcastle for 2 years, and unfortunately, not in the top flight. But he did get Newcastle United promoted as a player, and he made such an impact here on Newcastle that they even brought down a helicopter on his final game as well, or was it on his testimonial? He's a legend more so for Liverpool as a player, that's for sure. He was there for our longest time and absolutely exceptional career there at Liverpool. But for Newcastle, he made a massive impact. And the reason that I've got him in this team, even though he was only there for 2 years, is the fact that because of him as manager as well, made a massive impact as manager. And of course, he then went on to manage England and what have you as well. But for Newcastle, legend, absolute legend. So I can't not put Kevin Keegan in the team. Malcolm McDonald, Super Mac. Again, a player way before my time. A lot of Arsenal fans may well remember Malcolm McDonald. He made an impact, a huge impact over there at Arsenal, as he did a little bit with Fulham, but in a big way as well with Luton Town. Didn't really get the opportunities with England because the manager at the time didn't really like Malcolm McDonald, didn't like his attitude or whatever it was, or just had other favourite players, don't know. But Malcolm McDonald was a goal-scoring machine, left-footed. In fact, I think his left leg was longer than the right leg as well. So quite how he managed to do what he'd done is phenomenal, but his left foot was phenomenal. In fact, on his Newcastle debut, he scored a hat-trick against Liverpool when Kevin Keegan was actually playing for Liverpool at the time as well. So loads and loads of footage of Malcolm McDonald. If you haven't seen too much about him, go watch him. Anyway, that's my 11. And of course, my 5 substitutes. Again, people will say, what about Gary Speed? What about Solano? Keith Gillespie, Les Ferdinand? That's cool, but who is it that you think I should be replacing them with? Anyway, Newcastle's had a lot of good players. A lot of poor players too. And hopefully in the future, we produce a lot of good players as well. Anyway, drop your thoughts below about it. Click thumbs up, subscribe. Catch you all in the next video.